There's a line to a quarry at the end of Thomas's branch. It goes for some distance along the road. Thomas was always very careful to whistle here in case anyone was coming. Early one morning, a large policeman was sitting close to the line. Thomas liked policemen. He had been a great friend of the officer who had just retired. Peep, peep, he whistled, "Good morning." Thomas expected that the new officer would be friendly too, but was sorry to see that he didn't look friendly at all. He was red in the face and very cross. "Disgraceful," he spluttered. "I didn't sleep a wink last night. It was so quiet, and now engines come whistling suddenly behind me." "I'm sorry, sir," said Thomas. "I only said good morning." A policeman pointed to Thomas. "Where's your cowcatcher?" he asked. "But I don't catch cows, sir." "Don't be funny," snapped the policeman. He looked at Thomas's wheels. No side plates either, and he wrote in his notebook, "Engines going on public roads must have their wheels covered and a cowcatcher in front to protect people and animals from being dragged under the wheels if they stray onto the line. You haven't, so you are dangerous." "Rubbish," said Thomas's driver. "We've been along here hundreds of times and never had an accident." "That makes it worse," the policeman answered. He wrote "regular lawbreaker" in his book. Thomas puffed sadly away. Sir Topham Hatt was having breakfast. He was eating toast and marmalade. The butler came in. "Excuse me, sir, you are wanted on the telephone." "Bother that telephone," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I'm sorry, my dear," he said to his wife. "Thomas is in trouble with the police, and I must go at once." At the station, Thomas's driver told Sir Topham Hatt what had happened. "Dangerous to the public, indeed. We'll see about that." Sir Topham Hatt spoke to the policeman. But however much he argued with him, it was no good. "The law is the law," he said, "and we can't change it." Sir Topham Hatt felt exhausted. "I'm sorry, driver," he said. "It's no use arguing with policemen. We will have to make those cowcatcher things for Thomas, I suppose." "Everyone will laugh, sir," said Thomas. "They'll say I look like a tram." Sir Topham Hatt stared. Then he laughed. "Well done, Thomas. Why didn't I think of it before? We want a tram engine. When I was on my holiday, I met a nice little engine called Toby. He takes freight cars from the farms, but the trucks are taking over most of his work and he needs a change. He has cowcatchers and side plates. I'll write to his superintendent at once." A few days later, Toby arrived. "That's a good engine," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I see you've brought your coach, Henrietta." "You don't mind, do you, sir?" asked Toby. "The station master wanted to use her as a hen house, and that would never do." "No, indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "We couldn't allow that." Toby made the silly cars behave even better than Thomas did.
Oi, you!
At first, Thomas was jealous, but he was so pleased when Toby rang his bell and frightened the policeman. They've been firm friends ever since. Toby and Henrietta are enjoying their new job on the island of Sodor, but they do look old-fashioned and need new paint. James was very rude whenever he saw them. Ugh, what dirty objects, he would say. At last, Toby lost patience. James, he asked, why are you red? I am a splendid engine, answered James. Ready for anything. You never see my paint dirty. Oh, said Toby innocently, that's why you once needed bootlaces, to be ready, I suppose. James went redder than ever and snorted off. It was such an insult to be reminded of the time a bootlace had been used to mend a hole in his coaches. At the end of the line, James left his coaches and got ready for his next train. It was a slow freight, stopping at every station to pick up and set down cars. James hated slow freight trains. Dirty cars from dirty sidings. Blah! Starting with only a few, he picked up more and more cars at each station, till he had a long train. At first, the freight cars behaved well, but James bumped them so crossly that they were determined to get back at him. Presently, they approached the top of Gordon's Hill. Heavy freight trains halt here to set their brakes. James had had an accident with cars before and should have remembered this. Wait, James, wait, said the driver, but James wouldn't wait. He was too busy thinking what he would say to Toby when they next met. The freight car's chance had come. Hurrah, hurrah, they laughed, and banging their buffers, they pushed him down the hill. On, yelled the cars. I've got to stop, I've got to stop, groaned James. Through the station they thundered. Disaster lay ahead. Something sticky splashed all over James. He had run into 2 tar wagons and was black from smokebox to cab. He was more dirty than hurt, but the tar wagons and some cars were all to pieces. Toby and Percy were sent to help and came as quickly as they could. Look here, Percy, exclaimed Toby. Whatever is that dirty object? That's James, didn't you know? It's James's shape, said Toby. But James is a splendid red engine, and you never see his paint dirty. James pretended he hadn't heard. Toby and Percy cleared away the unheard cars and helped James home. Sir Topham had met them. Well done, Percy and Toby. He turned to James. Fancy letting your cars run away. I am surprised. You're not fit to be seen. You must be cleaned at once. Toby shall have a new coat of paint. Please, sir, can Henrietta have one too, said Toby. Certainly, Toby. Oh, thank you, sir. She will be pleased. All James could do was watch Toby as he ran off happily with the news. Gordon was resting in a siding. Sometimes, he thought, it's really tiring to be such a large and splendid engine. One does have to keep up appearances so. Peep, 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 peep. Hello, lazybones, whistled Henry. What cheeks, spluttered Gordon. That Henry is too big for his wheels. Fancy speaking to me like that. Me, who has never had an accident. On jammed whistles and burst safety valves accident? Asked Percy innocently. No, indeed. High spirits might happen to any engine. But to come off the rails like Henry did, well, I ask you, is it right? Is it decent? Then it was Henry's turn to take the express. Gordon watched him getting ready. Be careful, Henry. You're not pulling the flying kipper now. Mind you keep on the rails today. Henry went off in a huff, and Gordon yawned and went to sleep. But not for long. Wake up, Gordon, said his driver. A special train's coming, and we're to pull it. Is it coaches or freight cars? Cars, said his driver. Cars, said Gordon. Puh. Gordon's fire was slow to start, so Edward had to push Gordon to the turntable to get him facing the right way. I won't go, grumbled Gordon. Don't be silly, puffed Edward. At last Gordon was on the turntable. The movement had shaken his fire. It was now burning nicely and making steam. Gordon was cross and didn't care what he did. He waited till the table was halfway round. I'll show them, he hissed. He moved slowly forward to jam the table, but he couldn't stop himself and slithered into a ditch. Ooh, she hissed. Get me out! Get me out! Not a hope, said his driver and fireman. You're stuck, you silly great engine. Don't you understand that? They telephoned, said Topham Hatt. So Gordon didn't want to take the special train and ran into a ditch. What's that you say? The special's waiting? Tell Edward to take it, please. And Gordon? Oh, leave him where he is. We'll get him out later. On the other side of the ditch, some little boys were chattering. Coo, doesn't he look silly? They'll never get him out. They began to sing. Silly old Gordon fell in a ditch, fell in a ditch, fell in a ditch. Silly old Gordon fell in a ditch, all on a Monday morning. Gordon lay in the ditch all day. Oh dear, he thought, I shall never get out. But that evening they lifted Gordon and made a road of sleepers under his wheels to keep him from the mud. Strong ropes were fastened to his back end, and James and Henry, pulling hard, managed to bring him to safety. Late that night, Gordon crawled home, a sadder and wiser engine. One day, Thomas was at the junction when Gordon shuffled in with some freight cars. "Phew," remarked Thomas. "What a funny smell." "Can you smell a smell?" "I can't smell a smell," said Annie. "A funny, musty sort of smell," said Thomas. "No one noticed it till you did," grunted Gordon. "It must be yours." Not long ago, he had fallen into a dirty ditch. Thomas enjoyed teasing him about it. "Annie, Clarabelle, do you know what I think it is? It's ditch water." Before Gordon could answer, Thomas puffed away. Annie and Clarabelle could hardly believe their ears. "He's dreadfully rude. I feel quite ashamed. I feel quite ashamed. He's dreadfully rude." And to Thomas they said, "You mustn't be rude. You make us ashamed." But Thomas didn't care a bit. "That was funny. That was funny," he chuckled. He felt very pleased with himself. Annie and Clarabelle were deeply shocked. They had great respect for Gordon, the big engine. Thomas left the coaches at the station and went off to the mine for some cars. Long ago, miners digging for lead had made tunnels under the ground. Their roofs are strong enough to hold up cars, but not the weight of engines. A large notice warns them not to enter the area. "Danger! Engines must not pass this board." Silly old board, thought Thomas. He had often tried to pass it, but had never succeeded. But this morning he had made a plan. The fireman went to throw the switch. "Now for my plan," thought Thomas. Bumping the cars fiercely, he jerked his driver off the footplate and followed them into the siding. "Come back!" yelled his driver. "Fire and smoke," said Thomas. "I'm sunk." And he was. "Oh dear," he said, "I am a silly engine." "And a very naughty one, too. I saw you," said Sir Topham Hatt. "Please get me out. I won't do it again." "I'm not sure. We can't lift you out with a crane. The ground's not firm enough." Let me see. I wonder if Gordon could pull you out." "Yes, sir," said Thomas, but he didn't want to meet Gordon just yet. "Down a mine, is he?" "Ha, ha, ha," laughed Gordon. "What a joke." "Poop, poop, little Thomas. We'll have you out in a couple of puffs." Strong cables were fastened between the two engines. "Are you ready? Heave!" It was a lot harder than they all thought, but at last Thomas was free. "I'm sorry I was cheeky," said Thomas. "That's all right, Thomas. You made me laugh," replied Gordon. "I'm in disgrace." "So am I," said Thomas. "Why, so you are, Thomas. Shall we form an alliance? You help me and I'll help you." "Right you are," agreed Thomas. "Good, that's settled," rumbled Gordon. And buffer to buffer, the Allies puffed home. was a beautiful morning on the island of Sodor. Thomas the Tank Engine's blue paint sparkled in the sunshine as he puffed happily along his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle. He was feeling very pleased with himself. "Hello, Thomas," whistled Percy. "You look splendid." "Yes, indeed," boasted Thomas. "Blue is the only proper color for an engine." "Oh, I don't know. I like my brown paint," said Toby. "I've always been green. I wouldn't want to be any other color either," added Percy. Well, anyway, huffed Thomas, "blue is the only color for a really useful engine. Everyone knows that." Percy said no more. He just grinned at Toby. Later, Thomas was resting when Percy arrived. A large hopper was loading his freight cars full of coal. Thomas was still being cheeky. "Careful," he warned. "Watch out with those silly cars." Go on, muttered the cars. "And by the way," went on Thomas, "those buffers don't look very safe to me." The last load poured down. "Help! Help!" cried Thomas. "Get me out!" Percy was worried, but he couldn't help laughing. Thomas's smart blue paint was covered in coal dust from smokebox to bunker. "Ha ha!" chuckled Percy. "You don't look really useful now, Thomas. You look really disgraceful." "I'm not disgraceful," choked Thomas. "You did that on purpose. Get me out." It took so long to clean Thomas that he wasn't in time for his next train. Toby had to take Annie and Clarabelle. "Poor Thomas," whispered Annie to Clarabelle. They were most upset. Thomas was grumpy in the shed that night. Toby thought it a great joke, but Percy was cross with Thomas for thinking he had made his paint dirty on purpose. Fancy a really useful blue engine like Thomas becoming a disgrace to Sir Topham Hatt's railway. Next day, Thomas was feeling more cheerful as he watched Percy bring his cars from the junction. The cars were heavy and Percy was tired. "Have a drink," said his driver, "then you'll feel better." The water column stood at the end of the siding with the unsafe buffers. Suddenly, Percy found that he couldn't stop. The buffers didn't stop him either. "Oh!" wailed Percy. "Help!" The buffers were broken and Percy was wheel-deep in coal. It was time for Thomas to leave. He had seen everything. "Now Percy has learned his lesson too," he chuckled to himself. That night, the two engines made up their quarrel. "I didn't cause your accident on purpose, Thomas," whispered Percy. "You do know that, don't you?" "Of course," replied Thomas, "and I'm sorry I teased you. Your green paint looks splendid again, too. In future, we'll both be more careful of coal." Edward was getting old. His bearings were worn, and he clanked as he puffed along. He was taking empty cattle cars to a market town. The sun shone, birds sang. But Edward was heading for trouble. Come on, he puffed. Oh, screamed the cars. Edward puffed and clanked. The cars rattled and screamed. Some cows were grazing nearby. They were not used to trains. The noise and smoke disturbed them. As Edward clanked by, they broke through the fence and ran across the line. A coupling was broken, and some cars were left behind. Edward felt a jerk but didn't take much notice. He was used to cattle cars. Bother those cars, he thought. Why can't they come quietly? He was at the next station before either he or his driver realized what had happened. When Gordon and Henry heard about the accident, they laughed and boasted. Fancy allowing cows to break his train. They wouldn't dare do that to us. We'd show them. Old Toby was cross. You couldn't help it, Edward. They've never met cows. I have, and I know the trouble they are. Some days later, Gordon rushed through Edward's station. Hoof, hoof, mind the cows. Hurry, 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 puffed Gordon. Don't make such a fuss, grumbled his coaches. A long stretch of line lay ahead. In the distance was a bridge. It seemed to Gordon that there was something on the bridge. His driver thought so too. Whoa, Gordon, he said and shut off steam. Oh, said Gordon, it's only a cow. Shoo! Shoo! He moved slowly onto the bridge, but the cow wouldn't shoo. She had lost her calf and felt lonely. Moo, she said sadly. Everyone tried to send her away, but she wouldn't go. Henry arrived. What's this? A cow? I'll soon settle her. Be off, be off. Moo, said the cow. Henry backed away nervously. I don't want to hurt her. At the next station, Henry's conductor told them about the cow and warned the signalman that the line was blocked. That must be Bluebell, said the porter. Her calf is here, looking for her mother. Percy will take her along. At the bridge, Bluebell was very pleased to see her calf again, and the porter led them away. Not a word. Keep it dark, whispered Gordon and Henry to each other. They felt rather silly, but the story soon spread. Well, 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 chuckled Edward. Two big engines afraid of a cow? Afraid? Rubbish, said Gordon. We didn't want the poor thing to hurt herself by running up against us. We stopped so as not to excite her. You see what I mean, my dear Edward? Yes, Gordon, said Edward. Gordon felt somehow that Edward saw only too well. One day, James had to wait at the station till Edward and his train came in. This made him cross. Late again? Edward laughed, and James fumed away. After James had finished his work, he went back to the yard and puffed onto the turntable. He was still feeling very bad-tempered. Edward is impossible, he grumbled to the others. He clanks about like a lot of old iron, and he is so slow he makes us wait. Thomas and Percy were indignant. Old iron? Slow? Why, Edward could beat you in a race any day. Really, said James, I should like to see him do it. Next morning, James's driver was suddenly taken ill. He could hardly stand, so the fireman uncoupled James ready for shunting. James was impatient. Suddenly, the signalman shouted. There was James puffing away down the line. All traffic halted, he announced at last. Then he told the fireman what had happened. 2 boys were on James's footplate fiddling with the controls. Phew! They tumbled off and ran when James started. The signalman answered the telephone. Yes, he's here. Right. I'll tell him. The inspector's coming at once. He wants a shunter's pole and a coil of wire rope. What for? Wondered the fireman. Search me, but you'd better get them quickly. The fireman was ready when Edward arrived. The inspector saw the pole and the rope. Good man, jump in. We'll catch him, puffed Edward. James was laughing. What a lark, he chuckled to himself. Suddenly he was going faster and faster. He realized that he had no driver. What shall I do? I can't stop. Help! Help! We're coming, called Edward. Edward was panting up behind with every ounce of steam he had. At last he caught up with James. Steady, Edward, called his driver. The inspector stood on Edward's front, holding a noose of rope in the crook of the shunter's pole. He was trying to slip it over James's buffer. The engine swayed and lurched. At last! Got him! He shouted. He pulled the noose tight. Gently braking, Edward's driver checked the engine's speed, and James's fireman scrambled across and took control. So the old iron caught you after all, chuckled Edward. I am sorry, whispered James. Thank you for saving me. You were splendid, Edward. That's all right, replied Edward. The engines arrived at the station side by side. Sir Topham Hatt was waiting. A fine piece of work, he said. James, you can rest and then take your train. I'm proud of you, Edward. You shall go to the works and have your worn parts mended. Oh, thank you, sir, said Edward. It'll be lovely not to clank.